Good morning. I'm Jamie Kelly. I represent Mojave County Water Authority.
Chris Udall with the Agribusiness and Water Council of Arizona.
Sandy Favorites with Freeport.
Don Bills, Coconino Plateau Water Advisory Council and Water Partnership.
Christian Sumpf with the Nature Conservancy.
Patrick Bray, Arizona Farm and Ranch Group.
Spencer Cams, Home Builders Association of Central Arizona.
Michael Curtis with the various individuals.
That's Arizona Cattle Feeders.
Pam Muse, Arizona State Land Department for Lisa Adkins.
Ron Doba with the Northern Arizona Municipal Water Users Association.
Jocelyn Gibbon, I'm here for Chris Custis with the Water for Arizona Coalition.
Jeff Cross with High Ground here from Mojave County.
Larry Robertson,
I'm
Water Law
Sharon
Attorney.
Morris with SRP, sitting in for Dave Roberts and Chuck Podolak.
Cole Ibera with the Dorn Policy Group, here representing La Paz County.
Senator Sina Kerr, representing LD13, designee of President Fan.
Natalie Mast, ADWR.
Carol Ward, ADWR.
Karen Modesto, ADWR.
Okay, those that are online, would you please introduce yourself?
You're still on.
Yes, this is Larry Robertson, Water Law Attorney.
Jen
Wade
Miles,
Noble.
City of Kingman.
Wade Noble. Wade Noble, Yuma County Agriculture Water Coalition.
Holly Irwin, La Paz County Board of Supervisors, District 3.
Crystal Tuli Cordoba, Navajo Nation Department of Water Resources.
Dallas Myron Meredith, representing clients.
Good morning. This is David Brown, Eastern Arizona, and Senator Griffin, I can only be on for about 30 minutes, so I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you all for being here.
I do not. Are we to item 2 for the follow-up questions to the well presentation last week, at the last meeting?
Yeah, here you do.
The next item on the agenda is the follow-up questions relating to the wells that were received from the September meeting's presentation, and I'm going to ask Karen to respond.
From the last meeting regarding wells and also questions about the groundwater flow models. We received a lot of questions related to wells in the state and other questions. The data available for wells outside of AMAs is very limited, and the Wells 55 database contains the data for the well type but does not include type of water use. So the question was, can a breakdown by user, such as provider, private, agricultural, of non-exempt wells outside of AMAs be provided? We just don't have that level of data available to us within the Wells 55 database, and that's the database we would use to obtain that information of registered well owners.
So to that point, if a well was drilled or the intent of well was drilled, whether or not it's usable, you don't have that information. Is that what I understand?
We can't tell exactly about that. Sorry. So something to keep in mind are the limits of the information that we have in the Wells 55 database. So I provided a few notes here. Currently, that database contains over 200,000 wells of record, and examples of the available data pretty much is limited to well owner, location, dates, driller information, and information provided by the owner. So it's considered to be a customer-based database. It further divides the well type categories based on use for inside the AMAs only. So, for example, non-exempt well categories in AMAs include recovery, injection, withdrawal permit, replacement well, service, and non-service area. But because non-exempt well owners outside of AMAs are not required to report the amount and type of water use, the data is not required.
And that's both for AMAs and non-AMAs?
Outside of AMAs.
Outside of AMAs.
This database contains data for wells all over the state because all wells are required to be registered.
So the wells that are in active management areas, exempt wells, you have that information?
Yes, we do.
Okay. That'd be good information to have. How do you get that information? Is it from the intent to drill, the completed well that's filed by the well driller?
So yes, they are required to file a notice of intent to drill, and after we review it, if it's complete, meaning the notice of intent, the information provided, then they're issued a withdrawal authority.
So,
Natalie?
So there is slightly different levels of information associated with each well required inside and outside the AMAs. So for non-exempt wells inside the AMAs, we have additional information, but the level of information that we have on exempt wells is going to be pretty similar inside the AMAs and outside the AMAs.
Okay, so you don't have that for inside the AMAs as well. So anybody can drill an exempt well in active management areas and non-active management areas, and information is limited.
Right. There are some limitations on the location of exempt wells inside the active management areas, but there's not additional data provided associated with those wells if they're allowed to be drilled.
Okay, and I guess that would depend on if there's a water company in the area and they have the franchise for that particular area. Okay. Any questions so far?
The only other limitation would be wells that were drilled prior to 1981, I guess, that are exempt, depending on what level of pumping they're doing.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We were asked the question, how long does the application process take for a well? And as I said, a notice of intent must be filed with either a county or ADWR. Again, that depends on the size of the lot that the well will be serving. We review the NOI, and if found complete, we'll issue the drilling authority. It takes 2 to 6 weeks. The next question we received was how many of the 1,800 index wells within the state are transducers, and there's 130 statewide. This map shows the location of those, shows telemetry sites, non-ADWR, which are square, might be hard to see.
Would you explain transducers, please?
These are wells that automatically transmit data so that we can have a continuous data source.
Question?
Question, yes.
Are those transducer wells?
Identify yourself.
Oh, Don
please.
Bills with the Cocaine Plateau Water Partnership.
Thank you.
Are those wells owned and maintained by Arizona Torrent Water Resources? Those 130 wells?
Yes, the 130 ADWR telemetry sites.
Okay.
So we did also receive a lot of questions about the Wilcox groundwater flow model, and I provided information to those folks who attended the meeting after the meeting, the model report. But model-related questions are best answered by our groundwater modeler manager, Keith Nelson. And if you have additional questions, we'll direct them to him, and we have submitted some of those other questions to him as well. So we didn't want to go back to the model today. All right. Well, let me ask if there are any other questions related to wells.
Any other questions? Yes, identify yourself, please.
Ron Dobo with NAMWA. I just want to confirm My understanding of the information that we have available for non-exempt wells inside AMAs and outside AMAs, is it correct that we do have monitoring information on those inside AMAs but not outside AMAs?
So there is monitoring information on wells both inside and outside the AMAs. The difference between the inside and outside had to do with the level of data that we have available in our Wells 55 database regarding the use and type of use and pumping information.
Are non-exempt wells inside AMAs required to report their water use?
Sorry, I forgot to identify myself.
Yes.
This is Natalie Mapp from ADWR. Sorry, say that question one more time.
Are non-exempt wells inside of AMAs required to report their water use?
In most cases, yes.
Is that on an annual basis?
On an annual basis.
On an annual basis, but not...
with certain limitations, non-exempt wells inside the AMAs are required to submit annual reports to our AMA section, yes.
Okay, but not outside of AMAs?
Not outside the AMAs,
okay, thanks.
correct.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, now we're to the most challenging part of this meeting. You have before you agenda item 3 that lists the topics which have been put before this committee. We need to perhaps narrow down this list or develop a strategy to work with this list. I think items 3, 4, and 6 actually belong as BMPs. For those of you that participated in the long-term water augmentation committee, that committee discussed those items, and they, I believe, found that those topics would be best addressed as BMPs. So as long as nobody has any objections, we're going to move that into the BMP area for discussion. Or the alternative is we send it back to the augmentation augmentation committee, which has already taken up the issue. The list is very, very broad, and to some extent, I think it puts us in a position to successfully complete our task at a challenge. Initially, at one of the first meetings, I suggested we looked at these issues by planning basins. So I would like comments from the committee members relative to combining 15 and 21 and deferring to stakeholders representing planning areas to propose the topics they would like to address.
Madam Chair, Bass Aha, from the cattle feeders. So, Jamie, are you suggesting that there's only 2 questions here that would actually just go to the local folks to talk about, and the rest of them, everybody else who may not be local and impacted or not impacted, get to opine on those?
Not necessarily. My intent is that it be a stakeholder process. The comments as to what matters need to be addressed, in my mind, should logically come from the area. The stakeholders know their needs better than residents of the state at large.
Madam Chair, Bass Aha again. So are you suggesting that another stakeholder group be created?
Not necessarily. I am suggesting that the stakeholders meet and discuss among themselves and then bring back to the committee, make a recommendation to the committee what topics they would like addressed. Quite frankly, the topics are too broad for this committee. We can't reasonably address all of these items on a basin by basin throughout the state unless there's funding somewhere for a consultant to come in to do that work.
Will those meetings be publicly held and noticed in meetings?
I don't have that answer. I hadn't quite gotten that far down. I looked at the list last evening and this morning. I think even if that stakeholder process were to occur, or if it is representatives from that stakeholder, those topics are going to be presented to this committee, and there would be public input at that time.
Madam Chair, and co-chairs, I would suggest that such stakeholder meetings be held in the areas of their where they're addressing, and that more than just people on this committee be invited to attend, that it be all of the public in the area to attend.
I agree. I think the area of concern, the people living in that area, it would be a hardship for them to come into this area, and so the meetings that are being discussed for their particular area should be in their area, and the meeting should be open to the public. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Ron Doba from NAMWA. This sounds kind of similar to me to the plan that some of us may be familiar with the strategic vision, where there was kind of an attempt to address all the planning areas with public meetings. And I think it got to, I'm not real familiar with how far it got. I think it got to a couple of planning areas. But do we know if the Department of Water Resources do they still have that plan in place to visit those planning areas and hold these public meetings to make a determination of what their water issues are? Because it kind of sounds to me like that's what we're trying to find out here. And it may be a duplication.
It may be. Ms. Ward? Or
the
Karen?
planning area process is currently on hold.
So, okay.
So if I may,
Carol.
Madam Chair, what I thought we were trying to achieve here with this group was to see if there were any additional issues or concerns that had been overlooked that we hadn't previously heard, and then prioritize them and start digging in and having discussions. We thought we were getting to the point where we could start having substantive discussion. The council had, at their last meeting, directed this group to begin digging in and getting to that point. And so what I thought we were going to do at today's meeting was hear from this group if there was anything that we thought that we had overlooked. And at our last meeting, we had decided that we would send out an email, and this suggestion, I think Jamie might have come from you, that maybe we request that everybody at the sort of the planning area level, that the representatives from this group would consider if there were any issues locally that may need to be addressed that we hadn't already included in this list. Bring it back today, add it to the list, and then we begin prioritizing. Is that something that we could begin doing? Do you think that perhaps we are overlooking things at the local level that we need to build a larger process at this point?
Madam Chair, Sandy Favorites from Freeport. Yeah, I'm thoroughly confused right now, so I'm trying to figure out where we're going with this. If we're creating a larger process, ultimately I think we need to hear from the planning areas. I think the planning areas are local. There definitely needs to be local input into this process, but trying to manage an unwieldy process, DWR has already attempted to go out into the planning areas and have these meetings, and it's been difficult. And I think the problem goes back to the the previous agenda item when we're hearing we don't have the information, right? So if we don't have the information, trying to decide for a planning area or within planning areas what the priorities are, we're just throwing darts at a wall without a dartboard. We have no idea what we're aiming for. You know, what is it that you're trying to accomplish if you don't have the information or adequate information to make those decisions, or to even have a conversation about what direction might be helpful. So that's the difficulty, I think, at least for me. I can't speak for anybody else here, but I'm having trouble, you know, how do we take this list and rather than creating an unwieldy process, you know, if we prioritize it, some of these things are very vague, and I'm not sure. I'll be honest, I don't have a complete understanding of what some of the items on the list are even pointing to. So I don't know if anybody else feels that way, or if it's just me, the lone person out sitting here going, what the heck is going on? But, you know, I think there's items on here of statewide importance, that bridge planning areas that, you know, that are more focused on the state. Maybe there's a way to prioritize within this list into categories of some manner. I'm kind of lost right now.
Thank you for that comment. And perhaps we prioritize by statewide. The problem being is that even though it may be statewide, it may not be something that the local stakeholders want. And how do you balance that interest in this process? I concede that it is unwieldy right now. It just, those topics are broad ranging, and I think you have diverse interests throughout the state. So perhaps we prioritize by identifying the statewide importance. You know, one of the things I have consistently heard is data. We need data. We can't make decisions without data. How do you get that data? You have reporting requirements. Well, rural Arizona doesn't really want reporting requirements. You have volunteers, and then you're always going to have a question on how accurate is the data because it's been voluntary. So the balance seems elusive right now. Ms. Fabler.
Madam Chair, I agree that data is the problem, and I understand what you're saying, that, you know, people don't want mandatory reporting. There are ways. I mean, yes, voluntary is subject to. I mean, without outright calling somebody a liar, that, you know, I mean, we don't want to do that. I mean, the same thing happens in an active management area where they sign under penalty of perjury, and people say their annual reports are wrong. So I don't want to get into debate of who's right, who's wrong. I just want to, I think the number one thing on there is number 14, and the need for more data in order to make valid decisions or valid recommendations going up the chain, or however this is going to work. I just feel uncomfortable saying we need, you know, whatever the number 12 is, agricultural production in areas involved in the adjudication. I don't know what that means, but what do we say for, I mean, how does anybody say, yeah, we need that? I don't, you know, without the data, without the information, is there a problem? And that was what the DWR was attempting to do in the strategic vision, was to identify areas where they believed there was potential problem based on the data that we had at the time. So we have data. It's just a matter of, do people believe that data, and are you willing to make decisions on that data? I don't think anybody's presented that in a manner for people here to be able to say yay or nay, this is something that's needed in this area.
Yeah, Spencer Camps, Home Builders Association. I completely agree with Sandy. I feel like I don't feel like I have enough information to make a recommendation on a lot of these issues, and I feel somewhat like I'm being put in a position of potentially jamming some issues down the throat of the local community that may not agree with it. To the earlier comments about locals not necessarily wanting to report their water usage, there may be good reasons for that, I don't know, but I don't want to be necessarily asked to make recommendations that I don't think would be acceptable to some of these rural communities, and it's kind of an awkward position right now.
Thank you. Sandy, I have a question for you based on your experience with the strategic vision. How do we get that data? How do we collect data?
So we have existing data that we collected in the WR, whatever the heck that was. DC, yes, there's too many of them. So we have some existing data that we can build on from that. I don't want to get into, basically what we end up doing is doing what we did in the WRDC, which was a freaking nightmare trying to get information. But I think DWR is perfectly capable. I believe DWR is perfectly capable of building off of that data as we had to do in the strategic vision. We had to make estimates. And those estimates are as best as you can be. Even with reported data, you're going to be wrong. The day you put it down in writing, the data is going to be wrong. But we have a ballpark figure, and we can figure out, I believe, with adequate information, what might be helpful in each of these planning areas. Now, you go beyond that and what somebody's willing or not willing to do, those are discussions that have to be held at the planning area level.
Mr. Curtis?
As a matter of reference for those that are not within an AMA, the socioeconomic and political consequences that will be impending are set forth forcefully in a book called The Harvest Land, which is a history of water in California and the socioeconomic and political consequences of not having a Groundwater Management Act, and I suggest that interested people in non-AMA areas that have a concern read the book to understand the socioeconomic and political impacts that are now in California, help provide some frame of reference for where they may want to go.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. We have a participant on the phone who would like to make a comment, please.
Please identify yourself.
This is Zach Richards with the AWR. Just in the back here, I'm just going to read the comment from Ms. Kathy Ferris, who says, the purpose of this committee is to do the work. The committee should prioritize the topics for discussion and proceed to work its way through them with the information provided by ADWR. She agrees with Sandy that creating an unwieldy process is counterproductive. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Ferris. So, DWR, Sandy has said you have data that we can build off. Is that possible from your perspective? Do you need more data? Do you know what type of data you need or you desire?
That is correct. We do have data. We need to understand what type of data that the committee would like to see, prioritize those planning areas, and then we can show you what the limitations of the data is, and then go from there.
And it would also help to understand what issues it is that we need to dig into first. What are the priorities that this committee is making? So can we get in the council, as Ms. Ferris just said, the council has directed us to look at the issues, prioritize the issues, and begin discussing the issues that are important to this group.
I believe we can prioritize the issues, but I think the discussion is somewhat limited if we're looking to involve stakeholder process.
Jocelyn Gibbon, representing the Water for Arizona Coalition. One thought that comes to mind, because this seems challenging to figure out how to have a discussion that's meaningful and also incorporates input from local areas in an appropriate way. It seems like, Madam Chair, you pointed out number 15 and number 21 as ones that items that especially require information from local basins. I guess others have said some of these issues maybe could be talked about more from a statewide level. What about trying to prioritize those issues that seem like they could be talked about more from a statewide issue, and then also doing something less than a planning area stakeholder process, but more than nothing, like sending a letter to cities, towns, counties, and asking them what their information needs are about groundwater and what their, whether they feel like they have the information and data that they need, what gaps they know of, and whether they have a place that they can go to talk about groundwater issues. Something like that level of reaching out to local areas. Just a thought.
To that point, I would like to take it a little bit further than that. I would like for us to contact the cities and see what kind of water conservation projects that they have existing and what they plan on doing. I think number 5 is really important. Probably needs, in my opinion, to be moved at the top. Education of the general public on groundwater and incentives for documented groundwater pumping reduction and water conservation. I know I use water a lot differently today than I did 20 years ago, just because of the education that we all have been involved in. And I think the forest management is just not best management practices, but how much, the trees use and data. I think that's part of our charge in Free Adafite. We've had several bills to remove non-native species, and I think that's all part of what we're trying to do is what is the best way we can move forward with educating the public and having them buy in to what we're trying to achieve, and that's the best water conservation projects that we can encourage people to implement. So I don't know what Flagstaff or the other cities are doing. I think one of the first meetings I provided what Sierra Vista has done, and so I'd like to ask those cities that are involved in this committee to prepare and submit what water projects you have, teach us what you're doing, and how we can duplicate your great practices and move forward. Part of what we're doing is stormwater runoff and effluent. So I think all of that really does come within our charge. I know agriculture. In fact, I have a printout from a representative from one of the ag projects and the efficiencies in what they're doing and what they can do. It costs money to do it. So is there an offset? What can we do to encourage them to do the right things? And as we learn, we use water a lot differently today than we did 20 years ago. So I want to learn from everybody around the table. Tell me what you're doing and how can we duplicate it and teach the general public best ways to manage water.
Okay. We're going to take Carol first.
We just wanted to point out, of course, these are in no particular order. We just wanted to assign numbers to these in order to identify them for discussion purposes. And we also, I wanted to assure you, too, that we will be coming back later in the agenda to have discussion about best management practices specifically as well. We'll definitely discuss those.
Thank you. Cole?
Madam Chair. Cole Ibero with Dorn Policy Group, representing La Paz County. Supervisor Holly Irwin's on the phone, but she can't seem to get through, so she sent me a few comments. Just going back to the planning area meetings, Supervisor Irwin let me know that they've had 6 planning area meetings with ADWR out in McMullen Valley. The data was from 2010. The residents were extremely frustrated with the lack of updated info, and the last meeting was in 2017. So, I mean, without rehashing everything again, La Paz has gone through this process, and we know what we need in this non-active management area groundwater committee. That's a lot to get out. we need to know how much water is in our basins. We have big industrial users coming in. We don't know what water is being taken out, and I guess we need the tools to be able to monitor and look at how much water we have left in our basins for the future of La Paz and their future growth. So from ADWR, we need more information, and we want to be as helpful as we can to get you guys that information. So whatever you need from us, you have us at your disposal.
Thank you. Pam Muse, Arizona State Land Department. I agree that this list does appear daunting. One of the things that I noticed on the list is that, to me anyway, several of the things on the list seem to be data related, and several other things on the list seem, maybe they're jumping ahead a little bit and they seem to be more proposed solutions. So just a suggestion that that's another way that maybe we could condense this list down, is like put the data items in one area and then talk about which of those data items each planning area, feels that they need, and then put the solutions or potential solutions in another section. Might make the list seem less daunting and easier to comprehend.
Madam Chair, Ron Doba-Namwa. I agree completely with that. When I looked at this list, and it may be just from the perspective that I'm looking at it from, but I see about 4 items on there that could probably be combined into one, and that would be having to do with number 2, with well monitoring or measurement. Number 8, metering, monitoring, and reporting requirements. Number 14, the need for more data. And number 18, tax incentives or other means to motivate voluntary or cooperative reporting.
And I think that's a great solution. This is Jamie Kelly. And I think we make it number 1. Does anybody agree, disagree, have a better idea, a different idea? Because we need the data.
Cole Ibier with La Paz County. I think we would be wholeheartedly supportive of making that our number 1 priority, is getting as much data as possible on these at-risk basins. Thank you.
Yes. Been sitting here thinking, wondering if the County Supervisors Association and the Arizona League of Cities and Towns is involved, or if they could be approached to help assess the non-AMA areas within their different counties or cities, towns, assess their understanding, their needs, and see if they can help us acquire the data needed. Just a thought. I think they may be a resource.
They have participated in the past. The County Supervisors Association and the League. They're on our list.
Okay, good.
Spencer?
Personally, I'm just uncomfortable making it that issue number 1. I think everybody in this room knows there's significant opposition from locals on this specific issue. I get I understand the disagreement, that people want information, but a lot of people don't want to give information. And until you kind of do some education with people out in the rural community, I think it's not a good idea from this group of individuals in an office in Phoenix to make that a number 1 priority. I really don't. I don't think it's going to be a successful effort. You need to do some education in rural Arizona about the importance of water usage and deal with it from that side, and then that day may come.
Yes, what other comment?
Bill's Coconino Plateau Water Advisory Council. I would kind of follow up that comment and try and make the point, as the chair did earlier, that item 5, educating the general public and water users about the importance of developing good quality information is a real critical need in both rural and urban parts of the state. One of the things that bothers me about the way that is phrased in item 5 is it says to document groundwater pumping reductions, and I know that that's going to put a lot of people on the defensive because right away they're going to be thinking that, oh, these people are coming after my water. They want me to reduce my use so that somebody else, somewhere else in the state can gain access to and use that water. I think a better phrase would be just groundwater use. And once you make the public aware of how their water use impacts the sustainability of groundwater resources for their own benefit, as well as for the benefit of others, it makes it a little bit easier for them to consider, collecting or providing a group like this or some other group with the kinds of data and information that they need to be able to quantify the availability of that resource and how it might be changing over time. So that would suggest to me that there's this pretty strong link between item 5 and item 14 as well.
Yes.
Jocelyn Gibbon again, Water for Arizona Coalition. Just to be clear, when we say that we would make, if we made data a priority, we wouldn't make going out and collecting data a priority. We would make discussing what the challenges were related to data at this table a priority.
Sandy?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, I agree with Jocelyn on that, and its identification, include in that identification of existing data. I don't think we have a good understanding of all the data that is available out there. I think everybody needs to have that before we proceed down a path of, identifying that there are groundwater reductions or, all that. We have to have a better message and understanding.
And to that point, I'd like to make a recommendation that we set number one priority is that we need more data, not just from the Department of Water Resources. If we just so number 14, if we state we need more data, specifically from the Department of Water Resources, what go at the beginning, we don't know whether those wells are in existence or not. So we don't know if the owner is still the same owner. There's a lot of data that we don't have. So I would suggest that number one would be the need for more data, period. Number 2, educate the general public and groundwater users, period. Those would be my suggestions for number 1 and number 2 comments. Okay, here's one here.
Question is, ADWR is got a Phil Briggs type analytical model of the aquifers that are in the area. That we've had that, and I think we now still are just putting out a 3-dimensional model. People can actually understand what the aquifer is like, and with the available well information, local people can understand whether it's a tin cup that's got no bottom or no bottom, or something comes in around. I mean, if you want to educate the public, you got to tell them the truth. You got to tell them the truth with an illustrative. In our county, we have this model that you tell a well, they'll tell you what's going to happen around it. Educating the public, I think, has to start with something like a water model produced by the ADWR.
And that would be for more data. There's a comment from online.
Yes. So we have a few comments. Mr. Mark Lewis just wanted to note that he agrees with Ms. Gail Griffin that putting out a water conservation, reuse, and stormwater capture should be a higher priority than with funding before we push a mandated measure and reporting system. And then Ms. Kathy Ferris noted that she agrees with Ron and Pam and Jocelyn. Discussion is different than implementation. And she says, could AWR take a stab at combining the topics into like ideas for later consideration by the committee? Thank you.
Cole?
Madam Chair, I'm going to put on my City of Kingman hat for a second. I've got a comment from the mayor of Kingman. She cannot get through on the phone either. So she wanted me to mention that the Mojave County Study Committee is meeting for a second time on December 9th, and that they're anticipating more data will be provided at that time. They're doing a search for good quality data prior to making recommendations, and they'll also have data from the USGS study our county and city have contracted for. So data is a priority as basis for action for the City of Kingman, so we want to let you know that we are working hard to internally figure out what to do with our groundwater.
And do you have a list of conservation measures that you're already implementing and things that you plan on implementing? Do you have that you could supply to the committee?
I believe we do. I don't have it offhand, but I know the City of Kingman has been working along with Mojave County to put together implementation plans.
Thank you. Yes. Sandy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sandy Favorites with Freeport. And I may as well just keep pissing people off. But since we do have participation of our legislative representatives here, one thing that I don't see on the list, and really is the overarching issue here, data is not, I mean, there's ways to get data. There are ways that you can extrapolate data. We've done that. Pam and Doug and I and everybody at DWR has learned very well how to extrapolate data out of nothing. But the bottom line is DWR needs the resources. The concept of doing a Phil Briggs type, groundwater model to educate people. It's groundwater models are great. I mean, they're as good as the data that goes into them. But in order to do things like that and educate the public and do those things, I would request that a priority on this list has got to be funding for the department to make those things happen.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Doug Dunham with EPCOR, technically challenged with microphones, obviously. I just would like to echo Sandy's comment. There is alternate data available. It's in public forums. It may not be housed in DWR, but there's lots of publicly traded companies, for example, other federal agency, other federal programs that have this data. And a canvassing of that publicly available information would get us very far in being able to compile what both DWR has as well as what's also out there without doing, invasive mandatory reporting at this point. So I would suggest, maybe doing a canvas to see what is available and trying to compile some of that information.
Good idea. Other comments?
So we need a little bit to wrap it up and provide a little bit of direction. So does DWR have anything to add to the conversation relative to that data that's available in public forums and the canvassing, or are you looking for this committee to provide what type of information data it wants? I mean, I understand the topic is data and the need to acquire it. I am not certain who is to acquire it. And once it is acquired, what do we do with it? Nobody is anyway, I'm not advocating mandatory reporting right now. I think it is more that you need, the data is needed to assess the situation. It's the identification of the issues, not proposing solutions. Is that correct?
So, Karen Modesto from ADWR. So I would agree. We do have quite a bit of hydrologic data. It's the reporting data and information on non-exempt and exempt wells outside the AMAs where it's difficult to get at that data. We are in the process of developing queries to our database in order to provide that information to you by planning area but it will just give us an idea of what's going on within each planning area as far as the amount of potential pumping from a non-exempt well versus an exempt well. So we're working on that, but we have a limited amount of staff because getting at these queries is very difficult. Trying to create a new query to access it by planning area versus groundwater basin versus county, because they're all different, and there's different jurisdictions amongst those three different classifications.
So what is your current query?
We have well, you can query the Well 55 database. As we said before, that it's a customer-based database, and so it's the information provided to us by well owners. However, there is a lot of information there. Wells that have been completed and submitted completion reports. So we do know what's out there to a certain extent. There is some unknowns, but it would give us an idea of what's going on county by county or basin by basin.
So do you have a list of user information that you're missing? Because I know Community Water Systems report.
User information that we're missing, I'm not sure what you mean. Yes, Community Water Systems report, but they're the only ones who report outside the AMAs.
So setting aside exempt wells from non-exempt, what type of uses are you looking for information from, or do you not even have an idea?
We're not sure, because other than Community Water Systems, the non-exempt wells aren't specified by what type of municipal or what type of water use it is. So we just know it's a groundwater withdrawal well. If the name of the owner is the water company, then it's obvious, but all the others, we don't know for non-exempt.
And has the department ever sent out a voluntary questionnaire for people to respond to or not respond to, seeking that information?
I don't know.
Well, let's start with this. Let's go back and staff will have some discussion and we'll pull together some information on what's available and what's not available, and we'll come back and we'll talk to the committee, and we'll also work on refining this list a little bit, combining some things, and we'll bring back some ideas about how we can approach this. And if anybody has some ideas about other data sources that would be available to us, what we should start looking at, we'd certainly welcome that input. So please do get in touch with us. So,
okay, Doug?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Doug Dunham with EPCOR. Pam from the State Land Department and I just scribbled dozen potential data sources here. Maybe we put our heads together with Sandy, make sure we can kind of pull together everything we've done in the past, and then provide that, just email it to the chairs and to the department, and maybe that could be a jumping off point of a potential set of data sources.
That would be greatly appreciated. So let's start with that. We'll get in touch with all of you. We'll put some ideas together. We'll discuss this with the chairs, and we'll bring this back at the next meeting. Sound like a plan?
Does anybody have anything else they would like to add to the conversation relative to prioritizing before we move to the next agenda item? Of course, Sandy.
Just going back to I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Sandy Faber, Freeport. Going back to my original question on some of these items, in order to prioritize, I think we need some clarification on what is it that was put down here, and so the number 12 is sort of vague to me. I really don't know what that means. But should I just send those to you, Carol, and Karen?
Yes.
Okay. So any questions I have on clarification? Because I don't get it.
The comment on that previously has been, what are we doing when we don't know what the outcome of the adjudication is going to be? And, anything that we do, will it be beneficial or not to those individuals that are drawn into that adjudication? And so I think that's a big concern that we need to pay attention to.
I would like to just remind everyone to keep in mind that these items were submitted by the council members and the chairs. So I know exactly not exactly, but generally who submitted some of these comments, and we can request that person to provide more information. And I did get an indication from Stella Murillo, who is manager of our wells permitting section that we've never sent out a letter asking for more information. It's something that you could discuss with regard to non-exempt wells. I don't know what we could expect to get back, though, from non-exempt well owners if we send out a questionnaire, but it hasn't been done.
To that point, I talked to somebody this weekend that has a non-exempt well, and she said she files on an annual basis for water use. So maybe some do and some don't, but she was under the impression that, she had to report annually. If I tell her she doesn't have to report annually, she'll be happy to know that.
You said she has a non-exempt well? Okay. Outside of an AMA?
Outside of an AMA.
Is she a water provider?
No.
Okay.
Beth.
Madam Co-Chairs, members, I support the priority of needing more data. I align myself with some of Doug's comments. However, the discussion about not having data and certain uses not being designated, I can tell you that Navajo and Apache counties, northeast Arizona, you have that data. The vast majority of groundwater pumping in those areas is municipal and energy generation. That's it. Oh, there are a few exempt wells, but there's 43,000 people in Apache County. So, there's not so many exempt wells. But there's groundwater pumping, for that energy production. That's reported. And the municipalities up there report. So my only point to that is that there will be areas that we got a lot of information and areas that we don't have much, and we should, recognize it.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Spencer says, do I have to talk? Just briefly. I agree with what Bass just said, too. Patrick Cunningham, representing Mojave County today. I think it would also be important as we look at these requests for data for individual communities, local communities, if they think they have a basin at risk, if they think they have a problem, to come forward to the department and this committee and say, we'd like to study X. Mojave County brought their concerns to the legislature, and the legislature responded and created a study committee with local folks on it that is working and meeting, as Cole said, again in December. So I think if there are local communities that have concerns about groundwater pumping, they should come to the committee, come to the department, and we can address that basin by basin for the basins that are at risk. And those communities might help us put into focus how much data there is. As I mentioned, there's a bunch of data out there. And when you get Doug's and Pam's list, I think there's a lot of stuff there that we can then go through. First, we need to find out which basins are we concerned about. And starting at the local level certainly sounds good to us in Mojave County.
Short enough. You did a very good job.
Anything else on this agenda item? Okay.
Cool. We'll move on to the next agenda item. I guess we've talked about that agenda item, next steps to proceed with the highest priority. And so we're going to be working on those. So are we on number 5? Okay. The recommendation to pull 3, 4, and 6 best management practices, I still think is a part of this committee. I think we can create additional wet water with number 3, with proper forest management. Phreatophytes, I think, is a part of this committee. The map that I got, 15 years ago in the upper San Pedro River showed that the phreatophytes used 51% of the water. So these are things that I think proper management, we can create wet water. Recharge measures, methods, stormwater runoff, effluent and other conservation measures, I think is a part of this committee to put that together and request the information as to, you know, like I said, Sierra Vista provided what they're doing, and we have a report that I think the Department of Water Resources and State Land Department is working on to identify other recharge areas that we could implement to take advantage of stormwater runoff and during rainy seasons, what we can do to recharge. And I think that's part of, I think, lumping those together as to things that we can accomplish and make progress in, I think is part of this committee. So that would be my recommendation. The comment on well monitoring and measurement, and that's just not going to happen in rural Arizona with the way people feel in most of the area, and I know there's areas that do want it. But if that were to happen, it would have to go to a vote of the people in the area. And the backup plan is always the Department of Water Resources. So if there is a water shortage, or there's an area that qualifies for an active management area or non-expansion irrigation district, the department and the director has the backup on that they can declare an active management area in areas that don't have sufficient water. And if there's reason to believe there needs to be a non-expansion irrigation district, that study can be done and that determination made as well. So the backup is, of course, and has always been, the Department of Water Resources in that. Any other comments? And then do we do others and lump everything else into others and be able to address those later? Carol?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did want to provide an update on best management practices. We have been requesting that the committee and stakeholders provide us with any best management practices that they're aware of that we could share out with this group and with others. We are still taking any best management practices that you would like to submit. So we ask that you continue to forward those to us. In addition to that, staff is putting together a survey that we will be sending out as widely as we possibly can. We'll be sharing that out through our community water systems email database. We'll be asking folks to voluntarily provide information about both municipal and agricultural best management practices. Largely, we'll just be taking sort of a tally of basic BMPs that are in place, but we'll also be asking for folks to provide more specific information as they're willing to do so about their best management practices, links to additional information that we can then provide back out if they're willing to do so. So that will be coming out shortly, and we encourage you to forward that information, that survey, on to others that may be willing to provide that information. So we will report that back to the committee, if not at the immediate next meeting, hopefully in the next couple of meetings to you.
Good, thank you. And the water companies that are on the committee, and well, your communities, are you willing to supply the information that I requested as to what your communities are doing for water conservation measures and such?
Madam Chair, Ron Doba from NAMWA, we certainly would be happy to
Thank you.
Provide that information
Thank
from
you.
our member cities and towns.
Great, thank you. Doug?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Doug Dunham, EPCOR, just finishing up compiling the list of our BMPs that the company has followed both from the DWR mandates as well as from the Corporation Commission. And then lastly, I'm putting together some information on what our systems are doing in New Mexico, so sort of kind of a comparison of what other states are doing compared to what we're doing here in Arizona. So I'll provide that within the next week or so.
Wonderful, thank you.
I have a question.
In your query, are you just requesting BMP, or does that BMP also include conservation plan? Because some of the ag districts might not have BMPs, but they're going to have a 417 plan or a conservation plan that will have that information.
That's a good comment, Jamie. Thank you. I can include that.
And as to what is already statutorily in the laws, you know, what we can pull out of that, because there are some things already there. We'll include those. Any other questions? Okay. Jocelyn.
I was just going to say, if there's already a survey going out, that could be an opportunity to also inquire about local communities' needs and issues as they perceive them. I don't know how, how prepared you are to make a survey do double duty, but just wanted. It seems like we're thinking that we need input from local communities about how they view some of these issues. So I think it could be an interesting opportunity.
Any other comments? Wow, we went through the agenda. Any comments online? Don't hear any. Sorry that some could not tie in, but thank you for reporting that information from the mayors. And so the discussion now is future 2020 meetings. Session starts the second Monday of January, so Monday through Thursday. Our dates are limited, so they would have to be, our future meetings during session would have to be on a Friday. And so I guess Jamie and I will get together and figure out what's happening at the legislature and pick some dates and see if we can plan the future meetings. Any suggestions from anybody? Any problems with it being on a Friday? Go ahead.
We have our executive council meetings on the third Fridays of every month.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Yes. Okay. Okay. All right, great. Anybody else have conflicts on Fridays, please let us know. So we would like the maximum participation for the committee and the results. So if nobody has anything else?
Madam Chair, regarding conflicts,
yes.
NAMWA meets the third Friday of every month.
Okay.
And the Coconino Plateau Partnership meets the last Friday of every month. So.
Okay, that narrows it down. About the fifth Friday. All right. Thank you very much.
Friday's work.
Friday's work. Okay. Thank you very much, and keep in touch, and we will do the same. I do have some submissions that I will forward, and with that, committee adjourned. Thank you very much.